An HOA president thought she could intimidate a child, but when the video surfaced, she learned the boy she shoved wasn't just any kid. He was the son of the FBI director. She didn't hesitate. Geraldine Pruitt marched straight across the concrete path, her sandals slapping hard with each step, eyes locked on the group of kids sitting by the neighborhood tennis courts. The mid-afternoon sun in Bethesda, Maryland, was blazing down, and the air felt sticky, but Geraldine carried herself like the heat didn't touch her. Her voice, sharp as glass, cut through the chatter. "You don't belong here," she snapped, her finger jabbing toward one boy in particular. Noah Desmond, just 11 years old, skinny but tall for his age, his baseball cap turned backward as he sipped from a water bottle. The other kids froze. They'd seen Geraldine before. She was the HOA president, known for storming up to people about mailbox paint, driveway stains, or even kids leaving basketballs in the front yard. But this? Shouting at a child like he was a criminal? Nobody expected her to snap this way. Noah blinked, caught off guard. "Mom, we're just sitting. We're not bothering anyone," he said quietly, his voice steady but confused. That didn't matter to Geraldine. She took another step closer, her shadow falling over him. "Don't you talk back to me! You're trespassing! You don't live here, and you know it!" A small girl sitting next to Noah whispered, "He does live here. His house is on Chestnut Drive." Her words barely carried, but Geraldine heard them anyway. She wheeled around, eyes narrowing. "You hush!" Geraldine barked. Then she turned back to Noah, face twisted with anger. "Get up and leave before I call the cops." Noah didn't move. Not because he was trying to challenge her. He was stunned. His parents had warned him about being careful around people who acted like this, but he never thought it would happen here. He slowly started to rise, not wanting to escalate, when Geraldine's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. The grip was tight, much too tight for an adult on a child. She yanked him up and shoved him backward, the heel of his sneaker slipping on the asphalt as he fell. His elbow scraped against the rough pavement, a sharp sting that made his eyes water. The other kids gasped. One boy shouted, "Hey, don't touch him!" Another scrambled for his phone, already pressing record. Noah, on the ground now, pushed himself up with his good arm, his face red with embarrassment and pain. "Why'd you do that? I didn't do anything to you!" His voice cracked, part frustration, part fear. Geraldine loomed over him, her arms folded. "Don't you talk back to me, boy. People like you need to learn respect." That line, those words, hung in the humid air like a thunderclap. The kids knew exactly what she meant. And now, with the phone camera running, the whole world would soon know too. Just then, one of the neighborhood parents, Melissa Grant, came jogging over. She had been walking her dog nearby and heard the yelling. "What is going on here?" she demanded, pulling her sunglasses down. She saw Noah on the ground, his arm scraped and bleeding. "He's trespassing!" Geraldine snapped, standing her ground. Melissa shook her head. "Noah lives here. His parents moved in this spring, house at the corner. You know that. Everyone does." Geraldine's lips pressed thin. "That's not true. I check every new resident personally, and I've never seen his name on any list." The kids around them murmured in disbelief. One of them whispered loudly enough to be heard, "She's lying. Everybody knows his family's here." Noah, voice trembling, said, "My dad's name is Calvin Desmond. We just moved from D.C. Melissa's eyebrows shot up. "Calvin Desmond? As in, Director Desmond?" She crouched next to Noah, gently examining his arm. Her tone turned icy as she looked back at Geraldine. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Geraldine's face flickered, but only for a second. "I don't care who he says his daddy is. Rules are rules. Kids like him can't just do whatever they want." Melissa's voice sharpened. "Kids like him? That's what this is about." She stood, her hand firmly on Noah's shoulder. "You assaulted an 11-year-old in broad daylight, Geraldine, and don't think people didn't see it. You're finished." The boy who had been recording finally spoke up. "Don't worry, I got everything. Every word." Geraldine spun on him, eyes blazing. "Delete that right now, or you'll regret it." But the boy didn't flinch. He raised the phone higher. "My mom's a lawyer. I know my rights." For the first time, Geraldine's mask cracked. Her breathing grew uneven, her voice less steady. You kids are making a mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with. Melissa shook her head slowly. No, Geraldine. You don't know who you're dealing with. A silence fell over the group, heavy and uncomfortable. Geraldine turned, storming back toward her house, muttering under her breath. But every step she took, she knew more eyes were on her. And the boy with the phone? He wasn't stopping the recording. But this was just the beginning, because by the time the sun went down, the whole country would be watching. News spreads fast in a gated community. Sometimes it's a garage sale, sometimes it's a new car in a driveway. But today, it was Geraldine Pruitt putting her hands on an 11-year-old boy. By the time Noah was back home with his mother bandaging his scraped arm, half a dozen neighbors were already talking about what they saw at the tennis courts. Melissa Grant, the neighbor who stepped in, wasted no time. She was standing at the end of her driveway, dog leash in one hand, phone in the other, replaying the shaky video clip that one of the kids had captured. I can't believe she did this, she muttered, almost to herself, but the two women across the street overheard. Did what? Asked Patricia Nolan, a resident in her late 50s who had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 2 decades. Melissa turned the screen so Patricia and her friend could see. They watched Geraldine's hand yank Noah's arm, watched him stumble back and hit the ground, then heard her voice clear as day. Kids like you need to learn respect. Patricia's jaw dropped. Oh my God, she said that. Loud enough for every kid there to hear. Melissa answered. And now the whole internet will too. That video's already moving. On another corner of the subdivision, a cluster of teenagers were gathered, passing phones back and forth, replaying the clip like it was the biggest thing to hit their town since the 4th of July parade. My cousin already reposted it on Twitter, one of them said. People are going crazy in the comments. Meanwhile, inside the Desmond home, Noah sat at the kitchen island, his arm cleaned and wrapped with gauze. His mom, Dr. Lillian Desmond, kept glancing toward the front window, aware that whispers outside were growing louder. Noah, she said gently, brushing a hand across his hair. Tell me exactly what happened. He looked down at his lap. We were just sitting there. She came yelling. I told her we weren't doing anything, but then she grabbed me and pushed me. I didn't even talk back, Mom. Lillian exhaled slowly. I believe you. And now she's going to answer for it. She pulled her phone closer and began typing out a message. Just then, the garage door opened and closed. Calvin was home. He walked in wearing a plain button-down shirt and slacks, the kind of clothes that made him look like any other dad coming back from work, though his role was anything but ordinary. He spotted his son, the bandage, and the tension in his wife's face before anyone spoke. What happened? His voice was calm, but sharp underneath. Noah hesitated, then said softly, The lady from the HOA. She pushed me. Calvin's eyes narrowed. She what? Lillian stepped in. She grabbed his arm, shoved him onto the pavement. Melissa saw everything, and another boy caught it on video. It's already online. Calvin's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. He walked over to Noah and crouched beside him. You okay, champ? Noah nodded, though his eyes welled up a little. I didn't do anything wrong. Calvin's hand rested on his son's shoulder. I know you didn't. And you won't ever have to explain yourself to people like that, not while I'm here. Back outside, Geraldine wasn't hiding. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, daring anyone to say something. A few neighbors did. Patricia Nolan approached her with fire in her voice. Geraldine, we all saw the video. What were you thinking? Geraldine snapped back. Thinking? I was doing my job. Kids don't get to run wild around here. That boy was loitering where he shouldn't have been. Melissa, who had followed Patricia, chimed in. Stop lying. He lives here. Everyone knows it. Not on my list, he doesn't. Geraldine said, tapping her clipboard that never seemed far from her reach. Patricia's voice trembled with outrage. You physically attacked a child. A child, Geraldine. Do you realize how serious that is? Geraldine's chin rose defiantly. It was discipline. Somebody had to teach him. That word, discipline, spread through the crowd forming at the edge of her lawn. A few neighbors muttered in disbelief. Others pulled out their phones, recording again. Geraldine either didn't notice or didn't care. Inside the Desmond home, Lillian's phone pinged non-stop with messages from friends and colleagues. One text stood out. Turn on the local news. They're already running the clip. She grabbed the remote, flicked on the television, and there it was. The grainy video, slowed down, looped, narrated by an anchor. Tonight, outrage is erupting in Bethesda after a homeowners association president was caught on camera physically confronting an 11-year-old boy near the community's tennis courts. Noah's face flushed. Everyone's going to see me like that. Lillian kissed his forehead. Everyone's going to see her, not you. Calvin stayed silent, staring at the footage. His years of training had taught him not to react impulsively. But this wasn't just any case. This was his son, his family. And the woman outside had no idea who she had just laid hands on. But before Calvin could make a move, the police would get there first. And Geraldine was about to learn that her neighborhood wasn't hers to control anymore. The flashing lights came quicker than anyone expected. 2 Montgomery County squad cars pulled through the wrought iron gates and rolled up to Chestnut Drive, their sirens cutting out, but their presence loud enough to pull half the neighborhood onto porches and sidewalks. Geraldine Pruitt stood tall at the edge of her lawn, arms folded, chin high, as if she had personally called for backup. She was already rehearsing what she'd say. Trespassing kids, disrespectful, out of control. She planned to twist the story before it reached anyone official, but the crowd around her had grown, and voices were no longer whispers. People pointed, some shaking their heads, others holding up phones to capture every second. The first officer out of the car, Sergeant Adrian Keller, looked seasoned and stern, the kind of cop who had seen just about everything. His partner, Officer Renee Cole, scanned the crowd, noting the clusters of children and parents, their faces lined with anger. Keller walked forward. What's going on here? Geraldine wasted no time, stepping in front of him like she owned the street. Officer, thank goodness you're here. A group of children have been trespassing on community property. One in particular was mouthy and refused to leave. Things escalated. Escalated how? Keller interrupted flatly. Geraldine hesitated. He resisted when I told him to move. I had to guide him away. These people are making it into something it wasn't. Behind her, Melissa Grant spoke up. That's a lie. You grabbed him, shoved him, and made him fall. He's an 11-year-old boy. And it's all on video. Several kids held up their phones at once, proving her point. The officers exchanged a quick look. Where's the boy? Officer Cole asked. Melissa pointed toward the Desmond's house, just a few doors down. Inside, with his parents. Scraped his arm pretty badly. Keller nodded. Let's talk to them. But Geraldine stepped in front again. Wait a minute. I'm the HOA president. If there's a complaint to be made, it comes through me. You don't need to bother anyone else. That was the wrong thing to say. Patricia Nolan shouted from the crowd, You assaulted a child, Geraldine. You don't speak for us anymore. The crowd murmured their agreement, and Geraldine's face reddened, but she held her ground. Inside the Desmond home, Calvin had already spotted the flashing lights through the blinds. He turned to Lillian. Stay here with Noah. I'll handle this. When he opened the front door, the officers were already walking up the path. Keller extended his hand politely. Mr. Desmond? Yes. Calvin's tone was controlled, but there was steel underneath. We received a call about an altercation involving your son. Calvin's eyes flickered briefly toward Geraldine, who stood nearby with arms crossed. Altercation is a generous word, he replied. My son was assaulted. Melissa stepped closer, chiming in. I saw it myself. She grabbed him and pushed him down. There are at least 3 video recordings. Officer Cole said, We'll need to see your son, sir, and any footage available. Of course. Calvin opened the door wider. Come in. The officers followed him inside, past the foyer lined with moving boxes still half unpacked. Noah sat at the kitchen island, his bandaged arm resting on the counter. He looked small, quiet, but his eyes widened when the uniforms entered. Keller crouched down to his level. Hey, buddy, can you tell me what happened? Noah swallowed hard. She yelled at me, said I didn't live here. I told her I did. Then she grabbed my arm and shoved me. Did you do anything to her? Hit her back? Curse at her? Noah shook his head quickly. No, sir. Cole glanced at Lillian. Can we see the injury? Lillian gently unwrapped the gauze, showing the raw scrape along Noah's elbow. Cole made a note on her pad. Outside, Geraldine paced, muttering loud enough for neighbors to hear. They're just making this about race. Nothing but troublemakers. He's playing the victim. Her words carried, and the crowd reacted. Gasps, shouts, one man yelling, "You're done, Geraldine!" Another neighbor called out, "We've all seen how you treat people. You just picked the wrong family this time." Back inside, Melissa played the video for the officers. The audio was clear. Geraldine's words, her shove, Noah hitting the pavement. Keller's jaw tightened as he watched. He straightened and looked at Calvin. "Sir, we'll be filing a report. Based on the evidence, this qualifies as assault on a minor. We'll need to speak with Mrs. Pruitt outside." Calvin's face was calm, but his eyes were unyielding. "I expect her to be charged." "Yes, sir," Keller said. "We'll handle it." As the officers walked back out, the crowd leaned in. Geraldine stepped forward, expecting sympathy. Instead, Keller said firmly, "Mrs. Pruitt, you're being detained for questioning regarding the assault of a child. We have video evidence and multiple witnesses." Gasps rippled through the neighbors. Geraldine's face drained of color. "What? No, I'm the victim here. They're lying, all of them." Officer Cole took her gently but firmly by the arm. "Ma'am, please step aside. You'll have a chance to speak." Geraldine's voice grew shrill. "You can't do this to me. I run this neighborhood." Patricia Nolan shouted back, "Not anymore, you don't." Phones were raised high, catching every second. Geraldine's protests, the officers guiding her toward the squad car, the neighbors watching with folded arms. Calvin stood at the doorway, silent, his hand resting protectively on Noah's shoulder. He didn't need to say a word. Everyone could see who truly held the authority now. But what Geraldine didn't realize was that her arrest was only the beginning, because the video wasn't just staying in Bethesda, it was already racing across the country. By evening, the quiet suburb of Bethesda was anything but quiet. Geraldine's arrest was the talk of every driveway, porch, and phone call. The video had already made its way onto local news broadcasts, looping across TV screens in living rooms where neighbors sat stunned. What most of them didn't yet understand, though, was who they were really dealing with when it came to the Desmond family. Inside the Desmond home, Calvin sat at the dining table with Lillian across from him, both staring at their glowing phones. Notifications stacked one after the other, reporters asking for comments, colleagues offering support, and strangers expressing outrage. Noah sat between them, picking at the crust of his sandwich, still shaken. "Dad?" Noah said quietly. "Is she going to jail?" Calvin placed his phone face down. "She'll be questioned. And yes, she could face charges. What matters is you're safe. That's my only priority." Lillian leaned forward, her eyes soft but firm. "Calvin, people are going to find out who you are. If they don't already." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It was bound to happen. I wanted this move to be about giving Noah a normal childhood. I thought here, this community, would be far enough from the noise in D.C. Noah looked up, confused. "But what's the big deal, Dad? Why does it matter who you are?" Before Calvin could answer, his phone lit up again. This time it was a secure call, one he couldn't ignore. He stepped into the study and closed the door. The voice on the other end belonged to Deputy Director Alan Roebuck. "Calvin, I just saw the footage. It's already at the top of every major outlet's feed. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. They're all running it. People are connecting the dots. They know it's your kid." Calvin's shoulders tightened. "So much for privacy. Alan, this was never supposed to happen. We moved here to stay out of the spotlight." "I know. But listen," Roebuck continued. "This isn't just another viral clip. The fact that the FBI director's son was attacked, this changes the stakes. You need to brace for national attention." Calvin closed his eyes for a moment. "Noah doesn't deserve this. He just wanted to ride his bike with friends." Roebuck lowered his voice. "I get it. But the Bureau's already getting calls. They'll expect you to make a statement. If you don't, it'll look like we're dodging." Calvin stayed silent for a beat, then finally said, "Understood. I'll handle it." He ended the call and leaned against the desk, staring at the family photo framed above his computer. Lillian, Noah, and himself, smiling in front of the Lincoln Memorial, taken less than a year ago. It was supposed to symbolize balance, but balance was slipping fast. When he rejoined his family, Lillian studied his face. "Work? Words out?" Calvin said plainly. "It won't just be a neighborhood issue anymore. We'll be in headlines until this is resolved." Noah's eyes widened. "Like, everybody in the country?" Calvin nodded slowly. "Yes, everybody." Meanwhile, outside, neighbors gathered in clusters. Melissa Grant spoke with a small circle on her driveway, her voice lowered but steady. "Did you know Noah's father is the FBI director?" The group fell silent for a moment. Then Patricia Nolan gasped. "You're kidding." "No," Melissa said. "I heard it straight from Lillian. That's why Geraldine's finished. This isn't just about a neighborhood fight. This is national news." Another neighbor, Harold Jennings, scratched his chin. "Makes sense why they kept to themselves. I just thought he worked in government. Didn't realize that high up." Melissa folded her arms. "Well, Geraldine picked the wrong kid to manhandle. The internet's not going to let this one go." At that very moment, a news van pulled up near the entrance gate, its antenna rising as reporters scrambled out. Cameras pointed toward the quiet street. The neighborhood's sense of privacy, already cracked, was now completely shattered. Inside, Lillian peered out the window. "They're already here." Calvin put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this. But from here on out, nothing stays small. Not for us, not anymore." Noah watched from the window, his voice a whisper. "Everyone's gonna know me now." Lillian hugged him close. "They'll know what she did, and they'll know you did nothing wrong." But outside, Geraldine's allies, those few who still believed her, were whispering their own narrative. "She just tried to discipline a kid." One muttered, "This is being blown out of proportion." It didn't matter. The momentum had already shifted, and the truth was out. Geraldine hadn't just shoved a child. She shoved the son of the most powerful law enforcement official in the country. But the storm was only growing louder, because as night fell, social media would take the story from a local scandal to a national firestorm. By the time the streetlights flickered on, the story had already escaped the neighborhood. The clip of Geraldine Pruitt grabbing and shoving Noah Desmond was everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Each platform added its own commentary, but the outrage was unanimous. On Twitter, a post from a local high school student had already crossed 200,000 retweets. HOA president assaults 11-year-old boy at tennis court. Says, "Kids like you. This is Bethesda, MD. Disgusting." The video was attached, and every replay hit harder than the last. On TikTok, creators stitched the clip, some breaking it down frame by frame, others simply reacting with stunned silence or shaking their heads. One teacher posted, "I've spent 20 years working with kids, and if any adult put hands on a child in my school like this, they'd be fired instantly. Why does she think she's above accountability?" Cable news wasn't far behind. CNN ran the story under the banner, "HOA president caught on camera attacking child," while Fox highlighted FBI director's son at center of neighborhood incident. The phrasing varied, but the clip itself was unavoidable. Inside the Desmond home, Noah sat curled on the couch, his eyes glued to the television. Seeing himself fall, again and again, was painful. "Why do they keep showing it?" he asked softly. Lillian muted the TV and sat beside him. "Because the truth matters. People need to see what she did." Noah frowned. "But I don't want people to just see me falling." "That's all they'll remember." Calvin leaned against the doorway, his voice calm but certain. "They'll remember more than that. They'll remember how wrong it was, and that's what matters." Meanwhile, Geraldine Pruitt was at home, pacing her living room like a caged animal. She had been released pending charges, but the sight of the news vans outside her cul-de-sac made her blood boil. Her phone buzzed non-stop, but not with support. Former friends from the HOA board texted things like, "We can't defend you," and "This is bad, Geraldine, really bad." Finally, she picked up the phone and called her closest ally, Richard Colson, a longtime HOA board member. "Richard," she said, her voice sharp, "you need to get on social media and defend me. Tell them that boy was trespassing, that he was being disrespectful. Remind them who I am in this neighborhood." On the other end, silence stretched before Richard finally sighed. "Geraldine, everyone saw the video. There's nothing to defend. You went too far." Her voice rose. "Don't you dare turn on me. I made this community what it is. Without me, it'd fall apart." "Maybe it needs to," Richard said quietly, before hanging up. The weight of betrayal hit Geraldine, but pride wouldn't let her collapse. Instead, she grabbed her laptop and started drafting her own statement, calling it all a misunderstanding, insisting she never intended harm. But every time she typed a line, she remembered the video, the evidence she couldn't erase. Out on the street, Melissa Grant gave an interview to a local NBC affiliate. Standing with Patricia Nolan and a group of neighbors, she spoke clearly, anger laced with sorrow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't discipline. It was aggression, pure and simple. And the words she used, "kids like you," tell the story on their own. That boy deserves better. Every child deserves better. The reporter nodded solemnly, then asked, "Did you know the child is the son of FBI Director Calvin Desmond?" Melissa paused just long enough for the answer to sink in. "Now the whole country knows, and maybe that's the only reason justice will finally be served." Back inside, Calvin scrolled through his phone. Messages from fellow agents and government officials poured in, many offering sympathy, others reminding him to stay measured in his response. He tapped out a short reply to one colleague. "My son comes first. Always." Noah looked up at him. "Dad, what's going to happen to her?" Calvin crouched down, meeting his son's eyes. "She'll face the consequences? Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she won't escape this. And you need to remember, you did nothing wrong." Noah nodded, but his small hands twisted nervously in his lap. "What if kids at school make fun of me?" Lillian stroked his back gently. "They won't. They'll see you as the brave one who told the truth. And if anyone does, you've got us. Always." Outside, headlights swept across the street as more news crews arrived. Reporters shouted questions toward the Desmond home, but Calvin pulled the curtains shut. He looked at his wife. "This won't stop tonight. By tomorrow morning, this neighborhood won't just be dealing with HOA drama, it'll be on the national stage." And he was right. By dawn, the hashtag Justice for Noah would be trending worldwide. But Geraldine wasn't about to back down quietly, because she was already planning a defense that would only make things worse. By morning, Geraldine Pruitt convinced herself she could still control the narrative. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, a half-empty cup of coffee sitting untouched beside her. Her fingers tapped the keys in short bursts, drafting what she imagined would be her redemption. She wrote, "Yesterday's incident has been grossly misrepresented online. I acted only out of concern for the safety and order of our community. I never intended to cause harm to anyone. Children must be taught respect, and unfortunately, my actions have been twisted by those eager to vilify me." She read it out loud, proud of the phrasing, as if her words could erase what the camera had captured. With a deep breath, she posted the statement to the HOA's official Facebook page. Within minutes, the comments poured in. "Are you serious? You put your hands on a child. That's not teaching respect. That's assault. You called him kids like you. We all know what you meant. Don't gaslight us. You're finished. Step down, Geraldine." What Geraldine expected to be her defense quickly turned into an avalanche of criticism. The more she argued in the comments, the worse it became. Screenshots spread across Twitter. TikTok creators mocked her carefully chosen words, splicing her statement with the video evidence that contradicted every claim. Meanwhile, at the Desmond household, Lillian scrolled through the posts on her phone, shaking her head in disbelief. She really thought this would work? Calvin sat across from her, his expression unreadable. People like her always do. They think authority gives them immunity. But evidence doesn't lie. Noah, sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, asked, "What's she saying now?" Lillian hesitated, then read aloud. "She says she was protecting the community, that you were being disrespectful." Noah's face twisted in frustration. "That's not true. I didn't even yell at her." Calvin leaned closer to his son. "You don't need to defend yourself. The truth is clear. Let her dig her own grave." And that's exactly what Geraldine was doing. By late morning, Montgomery County prosecutors announced that an investigation was officially underway. At a press conference outside the courthouse, State's Attorney Carla Mendoza addressed reporters. We have received multiple video recordings, eyewitness testimonies, and statements regarding the incident involving Mrs. Geraldine Pruitt. Our office is reviewing the evidence carefully, but what we've seen so far raises serious concerns about assault on a minor. No child should be subjected to that kind of treatment, regardless of circumstance. Back in the neighborhood, Melissa Grant and Patricia Nolan gathered with a group of parents outside the clubhouse. Reporters swarmed them, microphones extended. Melissa spoke firmly. She doesn't speak for this community anymore. She abused her position of power, and she crossed a line no one can defend. Patricia added, "We've all seen her behavior before, harassing families, nitpicking rules, singling people out, but now she's been caught, and the world is watching. Enough is enough." The crowd behind them applauded. For once, the neighbors weren't divided. Inside her own home, Geraldine watched the press conference on television, her hands trembling with rage. She called Richard Colson again, desperate. "Richard, you've got to help me. These people are turning on me like wolves. You've been on the board for years. You know I didn't mean any harm." Richard's voice was weary. "Geraldine, I told you yesterday. I can't defend this. It's indefensible. The video doesn't lie." She raised her voice. "So you're just going to let them throw me to the wolves? I'm not letting anyone do anything. You did this. And now you have to face it." He hung up again. This time, Geraldine hurled her coffee mug against the wall, the ceramic shattering on impact. But her anger couldn't drown out the sound of her phone buzzing with notification after notification, resignation demands, furious emails, even reporters knocking on her door. She locked it and pulled the curtains shut, retreating deeper into her house like a bunker. Meanwhile, Calvin received a call from a close advisor in Washington. "Director Desmond, the White House is monitoring this situation. They're aware of the video and the implications. You may be asked to make a statement sooner rather than later." Calvin's voice was steady. "Understood. But my focus stays on my family. That won't change." Lillian overheard and squeezed his hand. "That's why people respect you. Because you know where your duty really begins." Calvin gave a faint smile, though the weight on his shoulders grew heavier by the hour. He had balanced crises on the national stage before, but never one that hit this close to home. And while Geraldine clung to the belief she could spin her way out of the scandal, the truth was spreading faster than she could type another excuse. But the real turning point hadn't even arrived yet, because the case was about to shift from a neighborhood dispute to the full force of the law. The following afternoon, the courthouse in Rockville, Maryland, was buzzing with reporters, cameras, and microphones. Geraldine Pruitt's name had become headline material not just in Montgomery County but across the nation. Local residents who once treated HOA disputes as background noise now found themselves standing behind barricades, watching history play out in their own neighborhood. Inside, the state's attorney's office moved quickly. Carla Mendoza, the prosecutor already familiar to the public after her press conference, signed off on formal charges: assault on a minor, child endangerment, and harassment. The words were sharp, each one heavier than Geraldine ever thought she'd face. When she entered the courthouse with her attorney, Paul Strickland, the flash of cameras nearly blinded her. Reporters shouted questions, drowning one another out. "Mrs. Pruitt, do you have anything to say to the boy's family? Are you stepping down as HOA president? Do you regret your actions?" Geraldine held her chin high, her lawyer pulling her along, but her face betrayed the panic she couldn't bury. Meanwhile, Calvin sat in a side office with Lillian and Noah, waiting for their turn to give statements. Noah sat nervously, swinging his legs under the chair. His scraped elbow was mostly healed but still wrapped in fresh gauze. "Do I have to talk?" Noah asked us, his voice soft. Calvin looked at him seriously. "Only if you feel ready. Nobody can force you. But your words matter, Noah. People will listen to you." Lillian placed a gentle hand on her son's back. "You don't have to be afraid. All you need to do is tell the truth. That's enough." Noah nodded, swallowing hard. Soon they were called into the room. A stenographer was already at the table, and prosecutors sat ready with notes. Carla Mendoza herself leaned forward, speaking gently. "Noah, I know this is difficult, but can you tell us what happened that day?" Noah's small voice filled the room. "She came over yelling, said I didn't belong. I told her I lived there, but she didn't listen. She grabbed me, hard, and pushed me. I fell and cut my arm. Carla nodded. And when she pushed you, did you feel like you were in danger? Yes, Noah said quietly. I didn't know what she would do next. Calvin's jaw clenched, but he stayed silent, letting his son's truth carry the weight. Later, outside the courthouse, Carla faced the media again. Cameras rolled as she announced, "We are moving forward with charges against Mrs. Geraldine Pruitt. No one, regardless of their position in a community, has the right to lay hands on a child. This is about accountability." The statement reverberated across news cycles nationwide. That evening, commentators debated the case. Some called it a clear example of abuse of power. Others questioned why such behavior had been tolerated until now. Back at home, Geraldine raged. Her living room was littered with crumpled drafts of statements she never released, her phone still buzzing with angry messages. Her attorney sat across from her, rubbing his temples. "Geraldine, the evidence is overwhelming. Multiple videos, multiple witnesses, and your own words caught on tape. Our best strategy now is to negotiate a plea." She slammed her fist on the table. "No, I won't say I'm guilty. I was doing my duty as HOA president. These people don't understand order. That boy was disrespectful." "Stop," Strickland interrupted, his patience worn thin. "Every time you talk like this, you dig yourself deeper. The jury won't care about your title. They'll care about what they see on that video." Geraldine's face hardened. "Then I'll fight it. I won't let them ruin me." Her arrogance blinded her to reality. Meanwhile, the Desmond family tried to keep life normal for Noah, but normal had become impossible. At school, classmates whispered, some offering sympathy, others curious. A few even told him they admired him for standing up to Geraldine. One afternoon, as Noah sat in the cafeteria, a friend slid into the seat beside him. "Hey, I saw the news. You're brave, man. My parents said she's always been nasty, but now she finally got caught." Noah managed a small smile, but inside he just wanted life to go back to before. At dinner that evening, Lillian looked across the table. "Calvin, what happens next?" Calvin set down his fork. "There'll be hearings, maybe a trial. We'll testify if needed. And the HOA? They'll have to answer for letting someone like her run unchecked for so long." Noah frowned. "Does this mean she can't be in charge anymore?" Calvin smiled faintly. "That's exactly what it means." And though the words brought comfort, everyone at the table knew the fight was far from over. Geraldine wasn't backing down, and her refusal to accept reality would drag the community into even deeper conflict. But the cracks in her power were showing everywhere, and the neighbors who once feared her were now rising against her, demanding she be removed once and for all. The Haight clubhouse had never been so crowded. Rows of folding chairs filled the main hall, every seat taken, with dozens more people pressed against the back wall and spilling into the hallway. A low hum of conversation buzzed through the room until the sound of the gavel cracked against the table. "Order! We'll have order!" barked Richard Colson, the longtime board member reluctantly chairing the emergency meeting. His voice carried, but only barely above the simmering voices around him. "We are here to discuss the recent incident involving our HOA president, Mrs. Geraldine Pruitt." That name alone sent a wave of murmurs rippling through the crowd. On the front row, Melissa Grant sat with her arms folded, Patricia Nolan beside her. Behind them, parents who rarely showed up to meetings were now front and center, their faces a mixture of anger and determination. Geraldine herself was present, sitting stiff-backed at the head table, a faint smirk plastered on her face as though daring anyone to challenge her. Her attorney had advised her not to attend, but her pride wouldn't allow her absence. Richard cleared his throat. "Given the serious nature of the charges filed against Mrs. Pruitt, we must consider whether she can continue in her role as HOA president." The room erupted. "She assaulted a child!" one parent shouted. "She's embarrassed this whole neighborhood!" another yelled. Geraldine raised her hand, trying to command the floor. "I'll speak now." Richard hesitated, but she stood anyway, her voice sharp. "This is a witch hunt. I acted in the best interest of this community, as I always have. That boy was where he shouldn't have been, and discipline was necessary. All of you know I've kept this neighborhood safe, clean, and orderly. Without me, it would fall apart." The reaction was instant. Boos, groans, and shouted words of outrage. Patricia Nolan stood up, her voice slicing through the noise. Safe. Orderly. Geraldine, you've harassed families for years. You've fined people over the color of their flowers. You've threatened to sue over mailbox paint. And now you've laid hands on a child. Don't pretend this is about protecting the community. This is about your control. Applause burst out across the room. Even Richard, who had tried to remain neutral, looked down at his notes, uncomfortable. Melissa Grant rose next. And let's be clear, what you did wasn't discipline. It was violence. And you targeted him because of who he is, because you didn't think his family belonged here. Well, guess what? They do. And the rest of us are done letting you terrorize this neighborhood. The crowd clapped loudly, voices cheering Melissa on. Geraldine's smirk faltered, her face flushing red. A man from the back, Kevin Ramos, spoke up. I used to defend you, Geraldine. I thought you were just strict. But seeing that video, hearing your words, you crossed a line, and there's no coming back from it. Richard banged the gavel again, trying to restore order. Please, please, one at a time. He glanced at Geraldine, then at the crowd. The bylaws give us the authority to hold a vote of no confidence. If the board and community agree, Mrs. Pruitt can be removed from her position effective immediately. The crowd broke into cheers, though Geraldine shot to her feet. This is outrageous. You can't throw me out. I am this HOA. Without me, this neighborhood will go downhill in weeks. You'll be begging me to come back. Melissa's voice rose over the noise. No one will beg you for anything. You don't represent us anymore. Richard, looking worn down, finally called for the vote. All those in favor of removing Mrs. Pruitt as HOA president, raise your hands. Nearly every hand in the room shot up. Only a handful remained down, Geraldine's, and two allies sitting near the corner who avoided eye contact with the crowd. Richard's voice was firm. The vote is clear. Mrs. Pruitt, you are hereby removed from your role as HOA president, effective immediately. Cheers and clapping erupted, the sound echoing off the clubhouse walls. Geraldine's face twisted, her hands trembling as she slammed her folder shut. You're all making a mistake. You'll regret this. But no one seemed to regret anything. Parents gathered around Melissa and Patricia, thanking them for speaking up. Neighbors who had stayed quiet for years now found their voices, relieved to see the end of Geraldine's reign. As she stormed out of the clubhouse, reporters waiting outside swarmed her with cameras and questions. Geraldine shoved past them, refusing to comment, but the images of her angry exit would run on evening news broadcasts across the country. Back inside, Richard let out a long sigh. Well, that's that. Melissa, standing tall, shook her head. Not yet. She may be gone from this board, but the courts still have to deal with her. This isn't over. And she was right. Removing Geraldine from the HOA was only the neighborhood's first act of justice. The real battle, one that would play out in front of a judge and jury, was still looming. But once the trial began, the stakes would rise higher than anyone in that room had anticipated. The courthouse in Rockville was packed to capacity on the first day of Geraldine Pruitt's trial. The case had drawn national attention. News crews lined the sidewalks, sketch artists scrambled for prime seats, and parents held their children's hands a little tighter as they filed through security. The headlines had already framed the story. HOA president versus FBI director's son. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Geraldine sat at the defense table beside her attorney, Paul Strickland. Her once polished appearance looked frayed, her blazer hung loose, her hair less controlled than usual. But her eyes still carried that stubborn fire, as if she believed sheer willpower could rewrite what everyone had already seen on tape. Across the aisle, Calvin and Lillian Desmond sat with Noah between them. The boy's small frame seemed swallowed by the wooden bench, but his presence was powerful. People leaned forward just to catch a glimpse of the child at the center of the storm. Calvin's hand rested on his son's shoulder, steady and reassuring. Judge Marjorie Whitfield, a stern woman known for her no-nonsense approach, called the room to order. We are here for the case of the state of Maryland versus Geraldine Pruitt, charged with assault on a minor, child endangerment and harassment. The jury will hear opening statements. Carla Mendoza, the state's attorney, stood first. Her voice was steady, deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, You will see with your own eyes what Mrs. Pruitt did. You will hear from the boy she attacked, from the neighbors who watched in horror, and from experts who will explain why her actions cannot be excused as discipline. At the end of this trial, you will find that no title, no position of power, excuses putting your hands on a child. Paul Strickland rose next, straightening his tie. This was a misunderstanding. My client acted out of concern for her community. She did not intend harm. The media has twisted this story into something it is not. I ask you to keep an open mind, beyond the headlines. But the jurors' eyes told another story. They already knew the headlines, and they had already seen the video. The first witness was Melissa Grant. Dressed in a simple blouse, she walked to the stand with calm determination. Under oath, she described every detail: the yelling, the shove, the scrape on Noah's arm. Carla Mendoza asked, "What were her exact words?" Melissa's voice was firm. She said, "Kids like you need to learn respect." The phrase hung heavy in the courtroom. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. When Strickland cross-examined, he tried to suggest Melissa had exaggerated. "Is it possible, Ms. Grant, that Mrs. Pruitt was merely guiding the boy away, not shoving him?" Melissa leaned forward, her eyes locked on him. "No, she shoved him. I saw it. Everyone saw it. And the video shows it too." The next witness was Patricia Nolan, who recounted Geraldine's history of harassment in the community, letters about trivial violations, threats of fines, constant intimidation. Carla used this to paint a picture. This wasn't an isolated act, but part of a pattern. Finally, it was Noah's turn. He walked slowly to the witness stand, small and nervous. Calvin squeezed his shoulder before he stepped forward. Judge Whitfield gave him a gentle nod. "Take your time, young man." Carla approached softly. "Noah, can you tell the court what happened that day?" His voice was quiet, but clear. "She yelled at me, said I didn't live here. I told her I did. Then she grabbed me and pushed me. I fell and cut my arm." Carla asked, "Did you feel scared?" Noah hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I didn't know what else she would do." Across the courtroom, Geraldine fidgeted, her jaw tight. When Strickland cross-examined, he tried to tread carefully. "Noah, do you think maybe Mrs. Pruitt was just trying to move you along? That she didn't mean to hurt you?" Noah shook his head firmly. "She meant it. She was mad. Really mad. I could tell." The simple honesty of a child cut through every lawyer's spin. The jurors listened closely, some with eyes softening in sympathy. After Noah stepped down, Calvin reached out and hugged him tightly. Lillian whispered, "You did so well, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." The prosecution rested its case, confident the video and testimony spoke louder than any defense Geraldine could muster. Strickland scrambled to rehabilitate his client, but every attempt fell flat. When Geraldine herself took the stand, her arrogance only hurt her further. "I was protecting this neighborhood," she insisted. "That boy was disrespectful. Kids need discipline, and parents these days don't provide it." I stepped in. Carla's cross-examination was swift and brutal. "So you admit you put your hands on an 11-year-old? Geraldine hesitated, then snapped. "Yes, and I'd do it again." Gasps filled the courtroom. Strickland buried his face in his hands. The jury's decision was practically sealed at that moment. Judge Whitfield called a recess, and the Desmonds stepped out into the hallway, greeted by reporters waiting eagerly. Calvin shielded Noah with his arm, ignoring the cameras, his voice calm as he told his wife, "This is ending the way it should. The truth is winning." But the verdict was still ahead, and it would deliver the final blow that Geraldine had fought so hard and failed so completely to avoid. The jury filed back into the courtroom after only 3 hours of deliberation. The packed gallery fell silent, the tension so heavy it felt as though even the air refused to move. Geraldine sat rigid at the defense table, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered something, but she ignored him, eyes fixed straight ahead. Judge Marjorie Whitfield addressed the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, standing with a slip of paper in hand. The sound of the paper unfolding echoed like thunder. "In the matter of the state of Maryland versus Geraldine Pruitt, On the charge of assault on a minor, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps and murmurs swept through the gallery. Geraldine's face twisted, the faint smirk she had worn for days finally evaporating. On the charge of child endangerment, the foreperson continued, we find the defendant guilty. She closed her eyes for a moment, her shoulders sinking as though the air had been knocked from her. And on the charge of harassment, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted, but Judge Whitfield's gavel pounded. Order! We will have order! The noise subsided to a hush. Judge Whitfield's tone was calm, but unyielding. Mrs. Pruitt, this court has heard overwhelming evidence of your conduct. You abused your authority, targeted a child, and acted with malice under the guise of community order. This community deserved better from its leaders, and this child deserved protection, not harm. Sentencing will be set for 30 days from now. But let me make this clear. Accountability has found you. Geraldine shook her head in disbelief. This isn't justice. This is politics. You're all against me. Her voice cracked, high and shrill, echoing through the room. Strickland put a hand on her arm, hissing, Sit down, Geraldine, please. But she jerked away, standing defiantly. I built that neighborhood. Without me, it'll fall apart. You'll regret this. Security moved closer, ready to intervene, until Judge Whitfield's gavel silenced her once more. Geraldine sank into her seat, muttering under her breath. Across the aisle, Calvin Desmond let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to Noah, who was clutching Lillian's hand. It's over, Calvin said softly. She can't hurt you anymore. Noah looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. She really has to pay for what she did? Yes, Calvin said firmly. That's what justice means. No one is above it. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors, activists, curious onlookers. When the verdict was announced, cheers broke out. Signs that had been hastily made the night before waved in the air. Protect our kids, no one above the law. Justice for Noah. Melissa Grant and Patricia Nolan stood together, addressing reporters. This isn't just about one boy, Patricia said. This is about every child who's been made to feel like they don't belong. Today, a message was sent. Enough is enough, Melissa added. Geraldine thought power gave her the right to treat people however she wanted. But power doesn't shield you from accountability. It never should. Inside, Calvin spoke quietly to a cluster of reporters who asked if he wanted to make a statement. He chose his words carefully, his measured tone carrying more weight than any headline. My son didn't ask for this. He was just a boy sitting with friends. What happened to him is a reminder of how dangerous prejudice can be when it goes unchecked. This isn't about me or my position. It's about protecting children and holding people accountable for their actions, no matter who they are. Noah tugged his father's sleeve, whispering, Can we go home now? Calvin smiled softly, nodding. Yes, we're going home. Later that evening, back on Chestnut Drive, the neighborhood looked different. The air felt lighter. Neighbors who once walked with caution now lingered on sidewalks, talking freely, grateful the storm had finally broken. The Desmonds' porch light glowed warmly as friends and neighbors stopped by to offer support. For the first time since moving in, the Desmond family felt truly welcomed. Geraldine's house, just a few doors down, was dark, curtains drawn, silent. Her reign of control was over, replaced by the echo of her own downfall. At the dinner table, Noah sat between his parents, eating quietly before setting down his fork. Dad? He asked. Yes, son? I'm glad you didn't let her win. Calvin smiled, his voice steady. She never had the power to win, Noah. She only had fear. And fear loses when people stand up. Lillian reached across the table, squeezing both their hands. And that's the lesson here. When you see something wrong, you speak up. You don't stay silent. Noah nodded slowly, the weight of the lesson sinking in deeper than any headline could capture. The story that began with one woman's abuse of authority had ended with a community finding its voice, a family finding strength, and a boy discovering that justice doesn't always come quickly, but it does come. And that's the takeaway. Prejudice, arrogance, and power games collapse under truth. It may take time, but justice has a way of showing up. To the viewers of this story, if you believe in accountability, in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, don't just stop here. Share these lessons, speak up when you see injustice, and subscribe, because these stories matter. And together, they remind us that silence is never the answer.